Who's the creepiest person you've ever met? Back in college, I had two roommates. We were not exactly close friends, but we came from the same small town, so sharing an apartment was easy enough. During our second semester, one of them asked if her younger brother could crash on our living room couch for a night or two. I was not thrilled about having a stranger in our space, but I did not want to cause drama, so I agreed. The moment he walked through the door, my stomach dropped. I cannot explain it, but there was this absolute deadness in his eyes. He hardly spoke a word to anyone and just sat there in the dark, staring into space with a cold, empty look. I felt this heavy tension whenever I had to walk past him, and it was a massive relief when he finally packed his bags and left. A few years later, I found out just how dark his reality actually was. His parents had kicked him out because he kept stealing from them, but he did not actually leave. He secretly sneaked back onto their property and built a hidden crawl space inside their garage. He cleared up his traces every single morning and lived there for months without them having any idea. Eventually, his behavior escalated. He broke into the house next door to his parents. A simple burglary would have been bad enough, but he stayed inside the dark home for hours, waiting in the shadows for the lady who lived there to return. When she finally walked through the door, he took her life in a brutal attack with a heavy tool. The police captured him not long after, driving her stolen car down the highway. He was eventually given the ultimate sentence by the state and faced his punishment a few years later. Hearing the news was shocking, but honestly, it was not a surprise. He was the most evil presence I have ever been close to, and my instincts knew something was deeply wrong with him long before any of it happened. Cultural note. In the United States, criminal psychologists often study the phenomenon of behavioral escalation in offenders who transition from covert property crimes to extreme violent offenses. Property violations like stealing from family or secretly living on their premises, known as domestic trespassing, frequently serve as warning signs before a suspect targets strangers or neighboring homes. Many years ago, right when home computers and early inkjet printers were first becoming popular for everyday use, we had an IT repairman who would come to our office whenever we had technical issues. There was just something incredibly unsettling and creepy about him. He was a deeply bizarre person, and he quickly seemed to attach himself to one of my coworkers, who was a very petite young lady. The two of us would always talk in private after he left, sharing how uncomfortable he made us feel just by being in the same room. Around that time, I was starting to get really into consumer technology and digital photography. During one of his visits, he started telling me about how he would take portraits of his stepdaughter at home. He explained that he would print them out in 4 separate panels and tape them together to create a massive image to frame on his wall. I was actually quite intrigued by the technical side of printing such a large image back then, so we chatted about his process a number of times. But about a year later, he suddenly vanished without a trace. It did not take long for the local news to break the real story. The authorities later revealed that he had been abusing his stepdaughter and was involved in producing illegal material inside the home. The police also revealed that he frequently dressed in women's clothing to alter his appearance. Because of this, the investigators had no idea if he was presenting as a man or a woman while he was running from the law. My coworker was absolutely terrified the entire time he was on the run. She lived in constant fear that he might show up at her house or target her next. Fortunately, the search came to an end about a month and a half later, when authorities found that he had taken his own life in a wooded area. He was never brought to justice, but with the investigation finally over, my coworker no longer had to live in constant fear that he might return. Looking back, all any of us wanted was for the nightmare to finally be over. Cultural note. In the early days of personal computing during the late 90s and early 2000s, The lack of digital forensics and centralized databases made it significantly easier for fugitives to evade law enforcement by altering their physical appearance. Additionally, early consumer software lacked the automated safety filters that modern networks use today to detect and report illegal material, allowing offenders to operate undetected for much longer periods. About 8 years ago, my friend and I decided to use a popular hospitality app while traveling. We were broke college students, so paying for hotels was out of the question. Our host was supposed to let us stay for 2 nights, but he canceled the first night just a day before our arrival. We had to scramble to pay for a cheap hotel, which completely ruined our tight budget. When we finally arrived at the address he gave us the next day, we could not even find a proper apartment building. All we saw was a massage parlor with dark covered windows. It was located right in the middle of the red light district of Hamburg. We eventually realized his place was actually inside this establishment. While the main area looked like a normal apartment, deep, unsettling noises kept coming from the basement. The host insisted that we go downstairs to the basement to help him carry some bed sheets. Something immediately felt wrong, so I lied and told him I had hurt my knee and could not use the stairs. He did not seem happy about my answer. As the afternoon went on, his attitude became increasingly hostile. He started making insulting remarks about my friend behind her back and kept complaining that we were not paying him to stay there. We tried explaining that the hospitality app we were using was completely free, but he refused to listen and insisted that his previous guests had always paid him. Things got even weirder when we went out to get some food. He claimed he was a professional chef and refused to let us order takeout, so we took the metro to find a grocery store. During the ride, he suddenly pressured us to change our route and go to a house far outside the city. We felt extremely unsafe and refused, insisting on going back. While we were arguing, he suddenly pulled a melted ice cream out of his coat pocket and offered it to us. Once we got back, his chef skills consisted of throwing a cheap frozen pizza onto a waffle maker. The melted cheese and grease started dripping all over the counter, and he actually started screaming at us, blaming us for the mess while we were just sitting there quietly eating a tomato salad. To make things worse, he warned us that his roommate was completely unstable and might make noise during the night. He was not lying about that. All night long we heard a woman screaming, laughing hysterically, and singing in this deeply disturbing, unnatural voice that sounded straight out of a horror movie. We were supposed to leave at 8 in the morning to catch our bus, but we could not take it anymore. We quietly packed our bags and slipped out of that house at 5 in the morning, finishing our sleep on the bus. The strangest part of the entire ordeal happened a few days later. He left a glowing review on my profile, saying we had been wonderful guests and that he had loved our conversations. After everything we had experienced, that review disturbed me more than anything else. It made me wonder whether he genuinely believed nothing had been wrong, or whether the entire encounter had been some kind of twisted game from the very beginning. Cultural note. In Germany, the city of Hamburg features the Reeperbahn, which is one of Europe's most famous red light districts. While the area is highly regulated and heavily patrolled by local police, budget travelers utilizing hospitality exchange platforms like couchsurfing often encounter unregulated properties or hosts operating commercial adult entertainment businesses, presenting significant safety risks for unsuspecting students. Back when I was 19 years old, I worked as a student employee at my university's art lab. I am a pretty short guy, standing at only 5 feet tall, so I usually tried to keep a low profile and just do my job. One afternoon, while I was busy wiping down the tables, I had to walk past a group of 5 students. The group was made up of 3 guys and 2 girls, who were all talking and laughing. As I got closer, one of the guys looked straight at me and made an incredibly hostile comment to his friends. He started making disturbing comments about wanting to corner me when no one else was around, loudly guessing whether I was Filipino or Guatemalan. He kept laughing, telling the others that he had never targeted any one of those ethnicities before. I froze inside, completely terrified. I did not know how to react, so I just forced myself to keep cleaning and tried my best to ignore them. I was terrified of getting fired, and being so small, I definitely did not want to provoke him or his group of friends. On top of that, it was a competitive art school, and being a person of color, I was terrified of getting blacklisted or labeled as difficult if I reported them to the administration. The group just kept going, throwing out more guesses about my background and talking in detail about how they wanted to hurt me. It was the dead glee in their eyes and that cold collective laugh that really sticks with me to this day. They eventually got bored and finally walked away after I moved over to clean a table closer to some other students. It was one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. Fortunately, I am doing okay now, and I have already graduated from that place, but I will never forget those 5 students sitting in that lab, laughing together as they casually talked about what they wanted to do to me. Cultural note. In many higher education institutions in the United States, student employees often face a vulnerable dynamic due to the fear of losing financial aid or campus housing associated with their work-study programs. Additionally, academic research on campus safety indicates that peer group dynamics can occasionally lower individual moral boundaries, leading groups of students to engage in aggressive verbal harassment that they would rarely attempt individually. Sadly, the most disturbing person I have ever known is my oldest niece. She just turned 16, but she has been engaging in deeply unsettling behavior for years. When she was only 12, she was staying at my house and casually confided in me that she admitted that she often had violent thoughts involving members of her family, and she described those thoughts in a way that deeply frightened me. She even admitted she enjoyed being physically aggressive toward her younger brother. The second they left my house, I immediately called my brother to warn him. He just let out a heavy sigh and told me they were already used to it, and that she was already in therapy for those exact thoughts. Ever since that phone call, I had this lingering awful feeling in my gut that she would eventually try to do something much more sinister. Fast forward to January of the year 2024, and my wonderful stepdad passed away from cancer. Our entire family was devastated, but according to my niece, nobody was hurting more than her. Not even my mother. My brother had generously booked hotel rooms for his wife, his kids, and me, so we could at least spend some comfort time together after the service. But my sister-in-law and the kids never made it to the funeral. We found out my niece had spent the entire week plotting to harm her younger sister while she slept. Fortunately, her school caught wind of her plans and reported it to the authorities just in time. Would she have actually gone through with it? Who knows? But I still shudder to think about waking up in that hotel room to a complete tragedy. She has been in and out of specialized youth facilities ever since that incident. The most chilling part is that she takes absolutely zero responsibility for her actions. She keeps calling her younger sister her best friend, and genuinely pretends not to understand why the poor girl is so terrified of her. Both of her siblings are completely traumatized to be anywhere near her. Whenever she is allowed back home, everyone in the house has to sleep with heavy locks on their bedroom doors. She constantly demands that every ounce of attention be focused on her. If it is not, she will find a chaotic way to force it. When her sister was preparing to go to summer camp, my niece deliberately burned her sister's neck with a hot curling iron. She has also tried to set their family home on fire on 2 separate occasions. She even got kicked out of a treatment facility after making direct threats against her roommate. My poor brother and his wife are completely at a loss. Right now, she is in a strict state program where she will likely stay until she turns 18, and then she might be turned over to adult state custody if nothing changes. She regularly tells her parents that she wishes her siblings were just gone forever, so she could be an only child. She is still too young to receive an official clinical diagnosis, but she is showing every single warning sign of a highly dangerous personality. I love her dearly, but I truly believe that if she is ever left alone with her siblings, she will do something terrible. I have seen that cold glint in her eye when she talks about hurting them. Cultural note. In the United States, children under the age of 18 who exhibit severe behavioral issues or violent tendencies cannot receive a formal diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, as personality traits are still developing. Instead, clinical professionals classify these behaviors under conduct disorder with limited pro-social emotions, which often requires intensive, state-funded residential intervention program structures. I spent a whole year couch surfing after my parents kicked me out when I was only 19. One of the places where I ended up staying was an acquaintance's trailer. The place was nearly condemned, and honestly, it attracted some of the roughest people around. Unfortunately, I had no other options and nowhere else to go at the time. I kept a 2-liter bottle of my favorite soda in the very back of our shared fridge. I even wrote my name on it with a marker along with a note saying, "Please do not touch." It might sound silly, but having that one small thing to myself was a major source of comfort. It was a treat that I would sip on whenever I needed a quick escape from my stressful reality. I did not mind if my actual roommates drank some, but the main guy who ran the place always invited random people over. I did not want those random people drinking my soda, especially directly out of the bottle. One morning, I woke up and walked to the kitchen, only to find basically half a cup of soda left. The bottle had been nearly full the night before. I got really sad and just asked out loud, "Hey, who drank my soda?" Everyone in the room immediately pointed fingers and told me it was this guy I will call Carl. Carl was an incredibly strange kid who was either my age or a year younger. He already had a terrible reputation around our neighborhood for stealing, substance abuse, and all kinds of sketchy things. I chose not to confront him because, frankly, he freaked me out. I quickly came to the conclusion that it was not worth creating further conflict over a simple bottle of soda. But just a few weeks later, Carl's very best friend went missing during our local county fair. His friend was a great kid who was actually close with my brother and got along with everyone. Soon after, Carl started bragging around town that he was responsible for his friend's disappearance. It turned out to be completely true. Authorities later concluded that Carl had been responsible for his friend's disappearance following a dispute involving money and substances after investigators uncovered crucial evidence in a nearby wooded area. The fact that I was sharing a tiny trailer with this kid only a few weeks before everything happened still keeps me awake at night. People in our town still remember his friend and talk about the kind of person he was. Thankfully, Carl and the 3 people who helped cover up the crime were eventually arrested, and he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Cultural note. Criminal investigators have documented cases in which certain offenders openly boast about violent acts before their arrest, seeking attention or a sense of control over the people around them. While this behavior is far from universal, it has appeared in numerous criminal investigations. Many years ago, I was working at a small retail store on a remote island in the South Pacific. It was a beautiful but highly isolated place where everyone eventually found out everyone's business. I had this regular customer who came in all the time because I had some technical knowledge about his specific line of work. He was an expat from another country, always polite and quiet whenever we chatted, but after knowing him for several months, someone finally told me his real history, and my blood ran cold. Apparently, several years before, He had gotten heavily drunk at a local spot and challenged a respected martial arts teacher to a physical fight. The teacher was highly skilled and ended up beating him pretty badly in front of everyone. Later that same night, humiliated and fueled by rage, my customer broke into the teacher's home in the dark. He carried a heavy blade and ended the teacher's life right there in a brutal, quiet attack. He was arrested and sent to the local prison, but justice worked very differently on that island. Their system involved the unique work release program where inmates were literally let out to work normal jobs from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. I think he served maybe a decade at most before he was fully released back into society. The only strict condition of his release was that he was legally banned from drinking any alcohol. One weekend night, I walked into a crowded local bar and ran straight into him. He was completely hammered, slurring his words and holding a drink. I was incredibly nervous, but I tried to act natural to avoid any conflict. I said hello and casually asked him how his day was going. He looked down at his glass, shook his head, and mumbled that it had been a really tough day. I tried to brush it off and said something like, "Yeah, I know how that is." The moment those words left my mouth, his entire face shifted. He stepped in close, got right in my personal space, and whispered in a highly aggressive tone, "No, man, you do not know. You have absolutely no idea." He just stood there, staring straight into my eyes with this empty, frozen glare for what felt like a whole minute. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I slowly excused myself, walked out of the bar, and went straight home. I definitely did not sleep a single wink that night, knowing exactly what he was capable of when he had too much to drink. Cultural note: in several sovereign territories and remote island nations in the South Pacific, correctional facilities often operate under highly localized work release frameworks due to limited infrastructure and small populations. Unlike high-security facilities in Western countries, these systems permit eligible inmates to leave custody during daytime hours to perform labor and support the local economy, which can occasionally lead to regular daily interactions between active inmates and the general public. I used to bring my young Labrador puppy into a local nursing home to visit one of my grandparents. My dog was normally super friendly, the kind of puppy that loved absolutely everyone and would wag his tail at any stranger. But during one of our regular visits, a man walked up quietly from behind us. All of a sudden, I just heard a voice saying, "What a cute dog." Before I could even turn around, my Labrador snapped. He immediately jumped up, growling aggressively and snapping his jaws in a way he had never done before. Fortunately, I was holding the leash tight, but I was completely mortified by his sudden behavior. I quickly looked up to apologize to the man, but the moment I saw his face, my breath caught in my throat. The man had this incredibly unsettling, creepy smile on his face. He was just standing there, completely calm, staring down at my snarling, angry dog without a single hint of fear or surprise. It was like he was enjoying the hostility. Within seconds, a couple of facility attendants rushed over and quickly led the man away from us. I was shaking, and I immediately started apologizing to the other residents sitting around the room. I decided to pull my dog out of the area right away to calm him down. As we were heading toward the exit, an old man in a wheelchair caught my attention. In all my previous visits, this man had never spoken a single word. He always wore a navy hat and just sat in total silence, quietly watching the room. As I walked past him, he looked straight at me and spoke in a very clear, calm voice. He simply said, "There is nothing wrong with your dog. That man is evil." Those words chilled me to the bone, and they proved to be true. It is not a crazy story, but that guy must have been deeply disturbed. 15 years have passed since that day, and my Labrador has never acted that way toward another human being again. Cultural note: in veterinary behavior science, Dogs are known to possess highly sensitive observational skills, allowing them to detect micro-expressions, muscle tension, and chemical changes in human sweat associated with fear, hostility, or bad intentions. Additionally, many security experts and veterans rely on animal reactions as a crucial tool for situational awareness in unfamiliar environments. During my time behind bars, I met several inmates who completely changed the way I looked at people. Prison is already an unsettling place, but a few individuals stood out in ways I will never forget. The first person was Jason Thornburg, who would later be convicted as a serial killer. We ended up in the same jail pod while he was awaiting trial. He spent nearly every hour of the day preaching to other inmates and leading Bible study sessions. One afternoon, I made a joke about the other inmate who helped him preach. Thornburg slowly turned toward me and gave me a look so cold and intense that I immediately regretted saying anything. I later learned that officers had discovered he was hiding a homemade sharp object inside his cell. From that day on, I always made sure I knew exactly where he was. The second guy was a registered sex offender with a deeply disturbing obsession with elderly women. He was only in his 20s when he was arrested after breaking into an elderly woman's home and behaving in an extremely disturbing way while she slept. There was an older woman on the prison staff who worked as a cleaner, and every time she walked past the cells, he would stare at her without looking away. It was incredibly unsettling to hear the way he talked about older women as though nothing about it was unusual. The third inmate went by the nickname Psycho. Strangely enough, he frightened me even more than the serial killer. He was affiliated with a local gang and was serving time on major drug distribution charges. One evening, he casually told me a story from when he was only 12 years old. He spoke in a rough, fragmented way, but I could still piece together what had happened. According to him, a group of older gang members had beaten a man until he could no longer defend himself. Then they handed the young boy a heavy hammer and forced him to finish what they had started. He was only 12 years old when he was forced to cross a line that no child ever should. Listening to him describe those events with almost no emotion made me realize why everyone called him Psycho. It was not the story itself that unsettled me the most. It was how completely ordinary it seemed to him. Cultural note. In the United States correctional system, jail pods are communal housing units where inmates awaiting trial share common areas, creating highly volatile environments where low-level offenders are mixed with dangerous individuals. Additionally, federal statistics show that violent gang initiations frequently exploit minors, forcing children into severe criminal acts to ensure lifetime compliance and silence through shared guilt. Jason Thornburg is an American individual behind one of Texas's most high-profile cases in 2021. He faced major legal charges after authorities confirmed his actions against the victims were premeditated and driven by personal beliefs. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. I still do not know if I should call this guy deeply disturbing, or if the entire experience itself was just the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. This whole nightmare happened about 8 years ago, but the details are still burned into my mind. It started during a long drive when some random guy decided to follow my car for over 60 miles. I was listening to music, completely relaxed, and did not even realize what was happening until I finally reached my destination and noticed his headlights pulling in right behind me. The moment I stopped, his vehicle blocked my path. Panic immediately set in, making my hands shake on the steering wheel. I kept my doors locked, called my sister, and told her I was coming over to her place across town instead of staying there. I put the car in reverse, managed to maneuver out, and took off. But this guy followed me the entire way there. He stayed glued to my bumper through dark alleys, winding back roads, and quiet residential streets. In a desperate attempt to find safety, I decided to park at a gas station right next to my sister's job. I chose that spot specifically because it was brightly lit, active, and full of security cameras. But that did not stop him at all. He actually stepped out of his vehicle, walked straight over to my driver's side door and tapped on the glass. He had this unsettling, wide smile plastered across his face. I only cracked my window open a tiny bit to hear him. He looked right at me, leaned in slightly, and calmly asked, "May I get in?" My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I firmly told him no. I was on the phone with my mom at that exact moment, and she was frantically screaming at me to hang up and call the police. I dialed them quickly, and the dispatcher told me to drive directly to the nearest police station. I pulled out of the parking lot, and of course, this creep followed me right out. He trailed me all the way to the station, completely oblivious to where we were actually heading in the dark. When we arrived, he would not even let me pull into a parking spot. He kept tailgating me and motioning with his hand for me to keep driving forward. At the point, my terror suddenly turned into pure boiling anger. I rolled my window down, stuck my head out, and screamed at him at the top of my lungs, questioning his intelligence. That was the exact second he finally looked up and realized we were sitting right in front of a police precinct. His eyes went wide with shock. He threw his car into gear, and he sped away down the street, never to be seen again. To this day, I still lie awake wishing I knew what he wanted from me that night. Cultural note. In the United States, law enforcement agencies heavily advocate for the safe haven driving technique when a motorist suspects they are being stopped on the road. Safety protocols advise drivers to avoid going to their own homes, as it reveals their address to the predator, and instead head directly to a well-lit police precinct, fire station, or a crowded public area, as most offenders will immediately flee once official authorities are in sight. Back in middle school, there was this kid who actually shared the exact same birthday as me. We ended up becoming pretty good friends early on. He was definitely a little weird, for instance. He grew his fingernails out long and literally sharpened them into points. He was also completely obsessed with making his own cartoon animal characters, but overall, he was pleasant enough to hang around with for a middle schooler. He liked my drawings, I liked his, and we both shared a massive love for things like Naruto and Pokemon. Eventually, I made other friends and started hanging out with them a lot. I saw the weird kid less often because our classes separated us as the year went on. But then, a popular Japanese show about a supernatural notebook that could take people's lives connected my entire friend group, and he started hanging out with me in my larger circle again. Things seemed to be going really well, and I felt incredibly social and happy during that time. Later that school year, we were sitting in French class when we suddenly found out he had been expelled. It turned out he had written a real-life version of that fictional notebook, complete with first and last names and crude drawings of around 20 people. He had written down terrible, detailed threats of what he wanted to do to every single one of us, along with long paragraphs explaining why he hated us so much. He had accidentally lost his composition journal at school. Another student found it, ran to the library to photocopy every single page as evidence, and then handed the original notebook directly to a school counselor. Later, I found out the most chilling part of the whole situation. I was named number 3 in that dark book, right after 2 of our teachers. Cultural note. In the United States, middle schools and high schools enforce strict zero-tolerance safety policies regarding threatening written materials or drawings on school grounds. Since the late 90s, any documentation resembling a threat assessment list is legally treated as an active emergency, resulting in immediate suspension, expulsion, and mandatory evaluation by local law enforcement and youth counseling services. My ex-husband had this incredibly toxic mindset toward me and basically all women. He was constantly making comments and critiquing women's bodies, acting as if we were only put on this earth to serve his personal needs. No matter what I did for him, it was never enough. He constantly pressured me to cross personal boundaries I was never comfortable with, and whenever I stood my ground, he acted as though I had failed him. He kept insisting that I owed him, but that rule never seemed to apply to him. I just wanted a partner to build a decent life with, especially since he grew up struggling financially. With me, he had a stable middle-class life for the very first time, but that was not good enough. He wanted someone he could completely dominate and own. The final straw came when he decided that since I could not meet his demands, I needed to agree to let him see other women whenever he wanted, and then just come back home to me. I obviously objected to this, and I was deeply disgusted by his hypocrisy. He eventually started wearing me down by asking constantly, and then refusing to speak to me for days whenever I said no. He would even make drinks and offer me one, waiting until I was relaxed and vulnerable just to ask me again. One night, I just broke down and told him to go ahead. He insisted that I say the exact words, "Just go ahead and have fun." So I did, but I added that I did not want to know a single thing about it, warning him that this would not work out the way he thought it would. A few weeks later, I discovered he was trashing my name online. He was putting up ads to meet random women, making fun of me to total strangers, and telling them that I could not satisfy him. He chose to be incredibly cruel just to get attention. That was the moment I knew I was completely done. When I finally packed my bags to leave, he first tried to pull me back with extreme affection and begging. He claimed his online ads were not even successful, so technically, he had done nothing wrong. Suddenly, he was writing letters to my parents, apologizing for what he did, but then turning around and claiming that I was the one who led him away from his faith. When he realized I was not budging, his entire attitude went completely cold. He sent me a text saying he did not want to use this against me, but that I had forced his hand. Right after that, he sent me an audio recording of the exact night I broke down and told him to go ahead. He had secretly recorded me, and he wanted to use that tape as leverage to force me back. At that exact moment, I realized just how disturbed this man really was. He made our divorce an absolute nightmare, fighting me every step of the way, and even forcing me to attend court-ordered counseling sessions with him. When he finally realized it was truly over, he decided to twist the knife one last time. He printed out private, deeply personal chat logs of us joking about intimate things from years ago, and he mailed them directly to my parents just to humiliate me. That was 10 years ago. Today he is still single, living in a spare room at his sister's house. 2 years ago, he actually made the local news after getting drunk and posting serious threats online against local government officials. Federal authorities later executed a search warrant at his home, confiscating all of his weapons and forcing him to plead to a lesser harassment charge to avoid major charges. He is no longer allowed to own weapons, and he had to submit his DNA to the state registry. As for me, I have been in a stable, beautiful relationship for 5 years now with a wonderful man who is my best friend and partner. He treats me with absolute respect, and we live a quiet, happy life together, hoping to start a family of our own someday. Looking back, I am just incredibly glad I listened to my gut and got away from that hollow house before things got even worse. Cultural note. Mental health professionals describe this behavior as coercive control, a pattern of manipulation in which one partner seeks to dominate the other through constant pressure, guilt, emotional blackmail, and isolation. When that control begins to slip away, some individuals escalate to intimidation, harassment, or other attempts to regain influence over the relationship. I used to work as an occupational therapist in home health care. One morning I called a new patient to schedule an appointment for an evaluation, and later that afternoon I arrived at a highly run-down long-term residential hotel. The man had recently been hospitalized for cardiac issues. My job was to help evaluate him and recommend special equipment to make his daily routine easier. The second I stepped into his room, my survival instinct started tingling. He had an incredibly flat, empty expression on his face, and he spoke in a monotone mid-level yell that echoed in the small space. His bed was just a bare, dirty mattress that looked like it had been slept on for so long. It was covered in a thick layer of dark, greasy residue. The rest of his living space was equally repellent, with trash and dirt covering almost every single surface. I sat down in the only plastic chair available at the far end of the bed. He sat right on the edge of the mattress, positioned directly between me and the main door of the bedroom. It took me a moment to realize that he was blocking my only exit from the room. I had barely started the evaluation when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked down and saw an urgent email from our office with a massive red flag icon next to his file. A second later, my phone rang. It was one of the senior social workers from our team. I politely told the man I had to quickly take the call. I sat there in that plastic chair, forcing myself to maintain steady eye contact with him while the social worker explained the nightmare on the other end. She told me this guy had been imprisoned multiple times for severe abuse, and he had a long history of violent offenses targeting female caregivers and workers. Her voice was shaking as she warned me that in his most recent incident, he had attacked a female staff member in a group home, throwing multiple heavy punches to her face entirely unprovoked, leaving her with severe physical trauma. Fielding that phone call while he sat just feet away, staring at me with those blank eyes, was easily the most frightening moment of my entire career. I ended the call and immediately began to craft my exit strategy, knowing he was physically trapping me in that corner. But then, only a minute later, he leaned in and began to explain how a friend of his was actively abusing a young boy at a local apartment complex. He was talking about it so casually, as if it were just a normal piece of gossip. I decided to stay a while longer. I forced myself to act completely clueless, pretending to be naive while sifting through my files. I sardonically played along, slowly trying to pry identifying details from him about the child and the offender. I stayed in that terrifying room for a good 40 minutes, carefully hiding my interrogation inside my medical evaluation questions. I made sure not to challenge him or speak back in any way, keeping my tone light and friendly. By the time I stood up to leave, he actually seemed to think we were great pals. I casually set up our next visit to keep up the act, zipped my medical bag, and walked out of the room as calmly as I could. The second I got to my car, I drove about a quarter of a mile down the road, pulled into a random parking lot, and immediately called the police. I gave the dispatchers every single detail I had gathered about the young boy and his location. Needless to say, I never went back to that hotel again. I still cannot believe my agency sent me into that room without warning me first about how dangerous he was. Just thinking about his empty gaze still makes my skin crawl. Cultural note. In the United States, home health professionals such as occupational therapists, nurses, and social workers often face significant safety hazards when conducting solitary home visits. While federal safety guidelines recommend thorough background checks, communication gaps between hospitals and field agencies sometimes leave workers unaware of a patient's violent criminal record, making field safety a critical topic of debate in the healthcare industry. I cannot point to just one single person, but a few individuals definitely stand out in my memory. I am listing them in no particular order, but each one of them left a cold, lingering feeling in my chest. Years ago, my ex and I went to Pensacola for a vacation. I stopped at a local Circle K to grab some beer, and there was a homeless guy standing just outside the entrance. His gaze almost stopped me dead in my tracks. He had these beautiful ice-blue eyes, but they were incredibly hard. It was a mixture of intense hate and deep regret. My survival instincts immediately flared up, whispering that this guy had done some truly terrible things in his past and was probably hiding out in Florida. It was hot and humid outside, but I was chilled to the bone just looking at him. At another point, I worked with a guy who had this creepy obsession with law enforcement, tactical gear, and any news involving physical violence. He also had an observed compulsion to steal things. I did not trust him at all, so I decided to keep my friends close and my enemies closer. I gave him a ride home a few times, but he would never let me drop him off directly in front of his house. One night, while I was driving him back, I had to stop to buy some gifts for an upcoming birthday. Out of the blue, he turned to me and confessed that his brother was forcing him to steal. He went on a rambling rant about how their mother had passed away, leaving the entire house to his brother, and strongly hinted that his brother would physically abuse him if he did not comply. He said his orders included constant shoplifting. It was a deeply disturbing glimpse into a very dark household. At a completely different job, I had the weirdest district manager. At first, he seemed decent enough, but he had this bizarre short laugh that he used for absolutely everything. It did not take long for it to feel incredibly wrong. We used to joke that a police officer could knock on his door to deliver the worst possible news about a family tragedy, and he would still let out that exact same laugh. There were constant rumors about heavy substance use, and while they were just rumors, there was definitely something empty behind his eyes. Finally, I once worked with a girl who was very loud, fun, and highly open about her private life. I initially flagged her as just a highly confident, independent person until she casually shared a story about being attacked by a guy. She completely shrugged it off, claiming it was no big deal, even while admitting she never consented to any of it. I was deeply disturbed because I realized I was looking at someone carrying severe trauma, completely locked in denial. It did not repulse me, but it made me realize she had likely survived some very dark criminal things in her past. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time, but you cannot force someone to see the truth if they are not ready. Cultural note: in the United States, social workers and trauma counselors often observe survival denial in individuals who have experienced severe personal violations. This psychological defense mechanism allows victims to minimize traumatic events as a way to maintain a sense of control and protect their daily functioning, which often manifests as a highly confident or indifferent outward persona. I work with this guy who is also a teacher at our school. He has this absolute, terrifying disregard for basic social cues, heavily mixed with deep-seated anger and constant frustration. The students complain about him all the time because his entire teaching method consists of yelling at the top of his lungs and writing up students for the smallest infractions. But it is what he does when he thinks he is alone that really chills me to the bone. Whenever he sits by himself in the break room, he starts whispering and talking to himself in this rapid, feverish voice. Then, completely out of the blue, he will just let out a loud, aggressive yell for absolutely no reason. On a surface level, he seems like a completely normal guy who just wants to talk about standard teaching methods and lesson plans. But once you actually sit down at a table with him, God help you, he will immediately bombard you with deeply private, uncomfortable questions, pointless, hostile opinions, and highly rude jokes that nobody ever laughs at. At one point, I actually tried to talk to him in private to gently address his behavior. I wanted to help, but absolutely nothing changed. The rest of our department has completely given up, and they just ignore him now. It has been going on like this for years. He actually came incredibly close to getting fired once, but somehow he slipped through the cracks and nothing happened. I honestly do not think this situation is going to end well, It feels like he is trapped in the wrong place, and he is a ticking clock waiting to go off. Cultural note. In the United States, public school administrations and human resource departments often face strict union regulations and complex legal procedures that make terminating a tenured or contracted teacher extremely difficult. Even when peers and students report severe behavioral issues, this bureaucratic shield sometimes leaves troubled educators in classrooms for years without proper psychiatric evaluation. During my 20s, I worked at a massive boarding house. It was a chaotic place that acted as a magnet for some of the most deeply disturbed people you could ever imagine. Over the years, the sheer variety of unsettling individuals we housed was staggering. We had an offender with a dark record targeting minors, and a deeply troubled woman who once caused severe injuries to her own legs with a massive kitchen knife right in front of us. There was a hostile guy who would stand outside threatening anyone who walked by with a machete, and another resident with severe psychological issues who paraded around the hallways pretending to be a security guard while carrying a sharp samurai sword. We also dealt with a peeping Tom who spent all day staring at our neighbors through heavy binoculars, a bizarre guy who owned a fully automated lifelike companion doll, and dozens of people who would just stand in the dark corridors screaming at the top of their lungs at midnight. We had aggressive extortionists, people with violent criminal histories, a chaotic hairstylist who was evicted after trying to perform an inappropriate cosmetic procedure on an unwilling client, and a highly unstable substance user who regularly yelled terrible things at young girls on the street. One night, we even had to break up a violent fight at the front desk, where a resident was actively trying to strangle their partner. On top of that, we had a sleepwalking alcoholic who would routinely wander the halls and urinate on our neighbors' doors, on the walls, and even inside their kitchen trash cans if they were unlucky enough to leave their doors unlocked. But if I had to choose the single most dangerous person in that entire house, it would be a young volunteer firefighter who lived on our 3rd floor. He was always incredibly polite, but he had a dark secret obsession with flames. He would regularly rush back to the front desk, breathing heavily, to report that he had just noticed a nearby tree or a car ablaze and wanted us to call the emergency services immediately. Eventually, his behavior escalated. One night, he threw a heavy fire extinguisher straight through a 3rd-floor window for no reason. On another night, he intentionally jammed slices of bread inside our commercial toaster, turned it to the maximum setting, and closed all the surrounding doors, hoping to trigger the building's central alarm system to summon his colleagues. We realized he was the one actively setting all those fires outside. We knew with absolute certainty that if we did not evict him that exact same night, the next massive fire would have been started right inside our own building, with all of us trapped inside. Cultural note. In the United States, criminal psychologists and fire investigators recognize a phenomenon known as firefighter arson. Studies show that a small percentage of volunteer firefighters suffer from pathologically driven pyromania, setting fires intentionally to experience the thrill of extinguishing them, to gain public recognition as heroes, or to satisfy a deep psychological need for excitement and control. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.